The air in the bank's lobby was shattered by the raw, contemptuous command. "Pick up your money from the floor." $75,000 in crisp $100 bills lay scattered across the polished marble, a humiliating carpet of cash. Desmond Pierce, dressed in a simple gray hoodie, lowered himself to one knee, collecting the notes with unnerving, measured precision. Behind the counter, Brittany Lowell couldn't conceal her smug, triumphant smirk as she pointed, enjoying the spectacle of the man in the hoodie being publicly humbled. The onlookers laughed, convinced they were watching a nobody being taught a lesson in front of his scattered funds. They saw a clumsy client. They didn't see the premier black card account status flashing on her screen. They didn't see the CEO's vehicle pulling up outside. They missed the one critical detail. Desmond Pierce was not scrambling to save his money. He was patiently gathering the evidence. And Brittany's smirk would die just minutes later, right before her career did. The story is just getting interesting. Ensure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The initial rush of adrenaline from the humiliating encounter was yet to come, the contemptuous words still hanging in the air. But to understand why Desmond Pierce was kneeling on a cold marble floor, we needed to know why he was there at all, 20 minutes before Brittany Lowell's casual cruelty began. Desmond Pierce was not a man who required flash. In the tech world, where he had made his name and fortune by selling a revolutionary data analytics platform to a major Silicon Valley firm before turning 30, his reputation was built on results, not displays of wealth. He preferred the quiet efficiency of his high-quality, but entirely anonymous, gray hoodie and dark, comfortable pants, the same outfit he wore when he spent late nights coding or visited his nonprofit projects. Today, he had chosen the attire purposefully. He wanted to be quick, quiet, and unnoticed for a mission that was deeply personal. He wasn't in the bank for a leveraged buyout or a portfolio review. He was there for his roots. Growing up in a rapidly changing, underserved part of the city, Desmond knew firsthand the difference between having resources and not. That's why he founded Code Future, a community lab dedicated to providing free, high-level tech education to young people who would otherwise never see a server farm, let alone learn to build one. That morning, the Code Future project was facing a critical deadline. A lease for a prime community space, a space that would allow them to double their capacity and launch a major summer coding camp, was about to expire, and the landlord only accepted physical payment, certified and delivered, within the next 2 hours. The amount, a precisely $75,000 cash withdrawal that he had authorized electronically an hour before. He had walked into the bank, not looking for respect or recognition, but simply for service. The branch was the flagship location for Crestview Trust Bank in the financial district, a monument to steel and glass, designed to impress anyone holding more than 6 figures in their account. The contrast between Desmond's humble, focused demeanor and the sleek, towering ambition of the building was immediate and sharp. As he approached the counter, the smell of sterile air and expensive leather hit him. He reached the desk of Brittany Lowell, noting her meticulous uniform and the practiced, detached warmth of her greeting. He was just another transaction, another number, and that was fine. He presented his card, his ID, and the withdrawal slip, expecting 5 minutes of processing time. He had no way of knowing that to Brittany. Looking up from the counter and seeing a black man in a hoodie requesting $75,000 in cash, he was not a number. He was a misplaced assumption, a stereotype that had just walked into her pristine environment, and she intended to deal with him accordingly. For Desmond, the $75,000 was the final hurdle to securing the future of dozens of kids. For Brittany, it was an immediate source of suspicion, an affront to the carefully controlled decorum of the bank, and the first step toward the public humiliation that would soon change the course of both their careers. Desmond moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being heard, even when he chose to speak softly. He glided past the polished steel columns and the discreet velvet ropes marking the path to the private banking offices, heading straight for the main counter. The large, embossed nameplate designated his target, Brittany Lowell. She was the picture of corporate expectation, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her navy suit jacket crisp, and her smile, when she initially offered it, was a practiced, professional mask. It was a smile designed to convey warmth without proximity, efficiency without effort. "Good morning," Desmond said, sliding his corporate card and his driver's license across the vast, smooth surface of the counter. "I need to complete a pre-authorized withdrawal. $75,000 in cash, please." The request itself was simple, but the effect on Brittany was immediate and noticeable. Her eyes, which had been scanning the documents quickly and impersonally, flicked up to meet his. She registered the matte black color of the card, the expensive engraving, and then dropped her gaze quickly to the photo on the license, then back up to the man standing before her. She took in the casual gray hoodie, high quality, yes, but still a hoodie, and the easy, unhurried stance. The gap between the request, a substantial, unusual cash withdrawal, and the messenger, a casually dressed black man, seemed to trigger a defensive calculation behind her eyes. The practiced, impersonal smile froze. It didn't disappear entirely. It just locked up, becoming thin and brittle. She picked up the card, holding it not by the surface, but gingerly by the edges, as if its high value was a potential contaminant. $75,000, she repeated, her voice losing its automatic, bright tone, settling into a lower register of suspicion. She typed something into her terminal, the sound of the keys sharp in the controlled silence of the lobby. "And is this a corporate or a personal account, sir?" "It's a corporate account," Desmond replied calmly, leaning his weight slightly onto the counter. He had been through variations of this script before. The questions always started when the transaction size didn't match the teller's preconceived profile of the client. "The authorization was sent over this morning. It's for a time-sensitive community initiative." Brittany didn't look up. Her focus was entirely on the screen, verifying the figures and the authorization code, her lips pressed into a tight line. The air between them, which moments ago had been neutral, suddenly felt thick and charged with unspoken judgment. Desmond knew the transaction was clean, the funds were verified, and his account status was unimpeachable. But he also knew that for Brittany, it wasn't about the system, it was about the appearance. And right now, the system was performing perfectly, while the appearance, his, was failing her silent test. Brittany's fingers tapped rapidly across the keyboard, the sound sharp and mechanical in the quiet bank lobby. She wasn't just processing the withdrawal. She was performing an open, dramatic display of due diligence, making it clear to Desmond, and to anyone listening in the quiet queue behind him, that she found his transaction suspicious. She leaned back slightly, her expression shifting from professional scrutiny to something tinged with open skepticism. "The system is confirming the authorized amount, Mr. Pierce," she announced, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry beyond the counter's privacy screen. "However, given the amount and the request for cash, I do have to complete some enhanced verification. Standard protocol, you understand. We take anti-money laundering regulations very seriously here at Crestview Trust." The pointed emphasis on anti-money laundering was clearly intended to make Desmond feel indicted by mere association. Desmond remained outwardly unperturbed, though he felt the familiar, hot rush of frustration, the realization that his appearance was again forcing him to defend his own legitimacy. He simply nodded. "I understand the protocol, Brittany. The funds are clean, and the corporation that holds the account is fully compliant. Everything you need is on the screen." She ignored his reply. Instead, she lifted the matte black card again, raising her eyebrows as if performing a magic trick. "And I must ask about this account status," she continued, her voice taking on a performative confusion. "This is a premier strategic black card account. We only issue these to our top institutional clients. Can you explain, Mr. Pierce, your direct relationship to this level of corporate access, given the nature of this withdrawal?" She wasn't asking for information. She was daring him to justify his own wealth in front of her. She tilted her head towards a nearby, older gentleman in a dark suit who seemed to be a supervisor. "Mark," she called out, turning her back partially to Desmond, making the conversation immediately public. Could you quickly verify a large cash withdrawal here? 75,000. The client is requesting cash from a premier black card corporate account, but I'm a little uncertain about the signatory. The supervisor, Mark, glanced over, taking in Desmond's hoodie and jeans, then Brittany's distressed look, and nodded curtly, confirming Brittany's bias with his simple, nonverbal agreement. He didn't approach the counter to speak to Desmond. He simply confirmed Brittany's right to question him. Desmond recognized the power play. Brittany wanted the public validation of the bank's hierarchy to confirm that he didn't belong. He could feel the eyes of the other clients, employees from nearby investment firms in their tailored suits, on him. He took a slow breath, settling his frustration. "Brittany," he stated, cutting through her theatrical concern, his voice calm and authoritative, yet low enough to command her to lean closer. "I am Desmond Pierce. I am the sole founder and the chief strategy officer of the holding company that owns this account. The funds are being moved to secure a lease for a nonprofit tech lab. There is nothing unusual about the transaction other than the fact you seem to find the person requesting it unusual. Please just execute the transfer." The finality in his voice momentarily silenced her. She hated the implication that he had called out her prejudice, but she couldn't back down now. She shot him a quick, poisonous look, confirming the animosity he had just exposed. She swiveled back to the screen, her lips tight. "Fine," she muttered, performing the final authorization with exaggerated force on the keyboard. "The transaction is authorized. I'll retrieve your cash, sir." The victory was momentarily hers, confirmed by the nervous, dismissive chuckles that rippled through the line of waiting clients. Desmond waited, knowing this little victory would likely lead to an even more passive-aggressive attempt at control. He was right. Brittany was already walking towards the cash vault with a stiff back, preparing her next move. Brittany returned from the vault with a crisp, tightly strapped package of cash. The $75,000 was substantial, and she placed it on the counter with unnecessary force, the thud echoing the tension in the room. It was clear she was irritated by Desmond's calm refusal to be flustered. "Here is your money, Mr. Pierce," she announced, the formality of Mr. Pierce sounding like an accusation. $75,000. Please verify the amount and sign here to confirm receipt and responsibility for the cash upon removal from the premises. She spun the electronic signature pad toward him. Desmond leaned forward, his focus entirely on the receipt, preparing to sign. The stack of $100 bills sat close to the counter's edge, precisely centered in front of him. It happened in an instant, a flash of movement that was too quick to be accidental, yet perfectly deniable. As Brittany reached for a pen that was already in a holder further down the counter, her right elbow extended in a smooth, casual arc. It wasn't a forceful blow, but a precise, cold snub, a calculated sweep that caught the corner of the heavy cash package. The stack immediately lost its balance, tilting and then exploding outward. The $100 bills flew, unbound by their straps, catching the air conditioning current as they fluttered down to the polished marble floor. The sharp, dry noise of the paper hitting the tile echoed dramatically across the silent lobby. The money scattered, some notes sliding quickly under the feet of the waiting employees, others drifting closer to the heavy glass doors. Brittany immediately clasped her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with a practiced, feigned shock. "Oh my goodness! I am so sorry, sir. My goodness! What have you done?" she exclaimed, instantly shifting the blame. A quick, wicked smirk flashed across her face before she replaced it with the mask of concerned professionalism. It was a victory, small and dirty, but one that cemented her sense of superiority. The humiliation was now complete, public, and undeniable. She had reduced a high-status man to chasing currency on her floor. The crisp, dry scent of the newly printed $100 bills now mingled with the cold, expensive air of the lobby. Brittany's feigned surprise lasted only a heartbeat before her true intent surfaced, delivered with a smugness that was breathtaking in its open cruelty. "Oh, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. She gestured sharply toward the scattered currency. Pick up your money from the floor, sir. Quickly now, before someone accidentally steps on it, or, heaven forbid, it goes missing. Any missing funds will be entirely your responsibility, you understand. The words weren't a request. They were a direct, humiliating command. They were designed to cut Desmond down, to use his need for the money, the crucial $75,000 for the community lab, as a leash to drag him to her level of contempt. The implication was clear. If he refused, she would happily complicate the situation further, turning the simple transaction into a federal investigation narrative she had already started. Desmond felt a slow burn in his chest, the familiar, bitter taste of prejudice he thought he had left behind years ago when he traded bus tokens for black cards. His first instinct, the visceral, human urge, was to stand tall, look her straight in the eye, and unleash the full force of his considerable professional authority, perhaps even calling the CO immediately. He could easily end her career in a minute. But Desmond Pierce was a strategist, a man who saw 3 moves ahead. An angry confrontation would only serve her purpose. It would confirm her image of the unstable, suspicious client, and potentially risk the time-sensitive lease payment for the kids. Shouting would reduce him to her level. Instead, he chose dignity. He chose control. He met Brittany's gaze, not with anger, but with an unervingly calm, assessing stare that flickered with a knowledge she couldn't possibly comprehend. He recognized the venomous power she felt in that moment, but he also knew its fragility. With a deliberate, slow movement, he lowered himself. He didn't drop suddenly. He went to his knee on the gleaming marble floor, his hoodie bunching slightly, maintaining a posture that was less submission and more profound focus. He ignored the snickers from the employees standing in line, the whispers that erupted in the lobby. His concentration narrowed entirely to the task at hand, collecting every single note. He started with the bill closest to his knee, carefully flattening the crisp paper, then moving his hand out in a methodical sweep. He wasn't scrambling. He was meticulous. He was counting, organizing, and above all, waiting. He would not give Brittany the frantic, messy satisfaction she craved. He would collect his money with the same dignity he used to earn it. The act of kneeling was a temporary concession, a bait, and Brittany, intoxicated by her small power, didn't realize she had just set the trap for herself. She watched, basking in the glow of her short-lived victory, oblivious to the fact that the clock on her own employment had just begun its final countdown. Desmond remained low on one knee, his head bowed only slightly, focused entirely on the small, isolated universe of scattered bills. He wasn't rushing. His movements were deliberate, the fingers of his left hand sweeping the polished marble, guiding the crisp, unfolded $100 notes into the neat pile he was forming on his right thigh. He was performing the task with the same precision he'd used to debug a complex line of code, methodical, detached, and utterly focused on completeness. He wasn't collecting money. He was collecting himself. The silence that followed Brittany's command wasn't truly silent. It was filled with the low, conspiratorial murmurings of the audience. The employees in line, the supervisors who should have intervened, the security guard by the entrance, all were witnesses to the spectacle of a man being humbled. A few stifled laughs, a cough, the barely perceptible shifting of expensive leather shoes on the marble floor. Brittany, standing tall behind her counter, was thriving on the attention. She leaned closer to a male colleague, her voice dropping to a theatrical stage whisper that Desmond, despite his focus, easily picked up. "I mean, seriously," she murmured, a sly smile pulling at her lips. "He tries to flash that black card, but can't even handle a simple withdrawal without making a mess. Some people try to look rich, but they just can't handle the transaction." The colleague chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. This was the validation Brittany craved, the confirmation that she had successfully identified and put in his place an outsider who dared to trespass on their turf. She was basking in the momentary, shallow power of prejudice. Desmond heard it all. The words landed like small, insignificant pebbles on his already steeled resolve. He knew the narrative Brittany was spinning, clumsy, low class, undeserving. He didn't need to look up to know that the colleague was nodding, that the customers were agreeing with their eyes. He didn't let the bitterness take root. Instead, he forced his mind back to the Code Future Lab. He visualized the raw concrete floor of the new space, the stack of unboxed monitors, the eager faces of the kids who were counting on him to close this lease. He reminded himself that the $75,000 in his hand, or currently on the floor, was exponentially more valuable deployed in that community space than it was used as fuel for an immediate, satisfying outburst in this sterile lobby. The bigger victory wasn't shouting her down. It was securing the future of those children. He continued his measured collection, his eyes only seeing the green and black ink of the bills. Each note he recovered was a small step towards that true goal. He was kneeling, yes, but he was not broken. He was simply gathering the bait, waiting for the true predator. The CEO he knew was scheduled to arrive, to walk into the trap. Desmond Pierce understood that true power wasn't in who could speak loudest, but in who controlled the eventual narrative. And right now, by remaining calm, he was setting the stage for the final act. His patience was his weapon. He knew, with absolute certainty, that her time was almost up. Desmond had collected the vast majority of the cash, the neat stack on his knee nearly complete. He was meticulously smoothing a stubborn fold out of a final $100 bill near his shoe, his focus absolute, when the mood of the lobby abruptly changed. It wasn't a sound so much as a cessation of noise. The nervous snickering died, the low hum of conversation ceased, and even Brittany Lowell's whispering paused mid-sentence. A powerful, distinct aura of high corporate authority had just entered the room. The heavy, soundproof glass doors to the main entrance swung inward, and framed in the opening was Franklin Mercer, the Chief Executive Officer of Crestview Trust Bank. He was instantly recognizable, a towering figure in the financial news, a man whose image was on every bank prospectus and annual report. He was a force of nature, always impeccably tailored, moving with a brisk, purposeful energy. Trailing behind him was a small entourage of executives and an aide, all struggling to keep pace. Mercer was headed directly toward the service desk, his eyes focused on the transaction area, ready to begin his busy day of meetings. Then he stopped. The halt was sudden, complete, and dramatic. The entire entourage behind him bumped into one another, creating a ripple of confused movement. Mercer's eyes, initially scanning for his appointment schedule, had locked onto the sight before him, the gleaming marble floor, the final few scattered bills, and the man in the simple gray hoodie kneeling on one knee, patiently collecting cash. His expression, usually a mask of controlled, corporate focus, fractured. It dissolved into a look of absolute, unmitigated horror and disbelief. Brittany, whose back was partially to the door, sensed the shift in the room's energy and finally turned. The moment she saw Mercer's frozen, furious face, the triumphant smirk she wore vanished. Her eyes widened, instantly realizing the catastrophic proximity of her superior to her petty, discriminatory show of power. Mercer didn't speak to his staff. He didn't check his watch. He just stood there, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar institution, staring at the sight of a man kneeling on his bank floor, a man who, in his mind, was not a suspicious client, but the key to a critical strategic investment fund they desperately needed to secure. The spectacle was not just embarrassing. It was a profound corporate disaster unfolding in real time. Desmond, still on his knee, knew the precise moment the trap had sprung shut. His quiet patience had just paid off. Franklin Mercer took 3 powerful strides forward, his polished Italian leather shoes hitting the marble floor with authoritative thuds that commanded immediate attention. He stopped directly behind the counter, forcing Brittany to turn fully to face him, his towering presence eclipsing her. His fury was palpable, not loud, but icy and dangerous. "Brittany, what in God's name is the meaning of this spectacle?" Mercer's voice was low and tightly controlled, the kind of tone that executives use when an explosion is imminent but must be contained for propriety. He didn't wait for her to answer. His gaze was fixed on Desmond, still collecting the final bills on the floor. Brittany's mind raced, scrambling for a plausible, self-preserving lie. She knew she was caught, but her ingrained arrogance and quick survival instinct made her grasp at the nearest excuse, which was, naturally, to blame the victim. "Mr. Mercer, sir, I apologize for the appearance," she stammered, her voice thin and unnaturally high. She quickly swept her hand toward Desmond, who was just standing up, the collected stack of cash now firmly in his grasp. This client, he was simply incredibly clumsy. He requested a large cash withdrawal and knocked the entire stack onto the floor. "I was just ensuring he understood his responsibility for the lost funds, per policy." She managed a brief, nervous smile, attempting to convey the diligent, responsible employee dealing with an incompetent customer. He really should be more careful with that much cash. Mercer didn't even glance at her. He didn't need to hear her version of events. The picture was grotesque enough. A man, who had done nothing wrong but be present, was humiliated on his lobby floor. And the person responsible was standing there, trying to cover her blatant disrespect with policy jargon. Mercer instead extended his hand straight past Brittany, across the counter, directly to Desmond. "Mr. Pierce, put the money down for a moment, please. We were expecting you upstairs 30 minutes ago for the final review of the Strategic Partnership Memorandum. I am Franklin Mercer, CEO of Crestview Trust, and I sincerely apologize for whatever delay or inconvenience you have experienced down here." The effect of Mercer's words was instantaneous and total. The lobby plunged into an absolute, deathly silence. Brittany Lowell's face lost every last drop of color. The faint smile of self-justification dissolved into a horrified, wide-eyed stare. The supervisor, Mark, who had moments earlier endorsed her scrutiny, physically flinched backward. The line of snickering employees froze, their attention snapping from the floor to Desmond's calm, composed face. "Mr. Pierce. Not sir, not client, but Mr. Pierce." A man who was expected in the executive suites for a strategic partnership discussion. A man who was so important that the CEO of the bank was now apologizing to him, publicly, for a delay he himself had caused. Desmond Pierce shook Mercer's hand, a firm, equal grip, and acknowledged the introduction with a quiet nod. He ignored Brittany completely, treating her as if she were a piece of furniture behind the counter. "Mr. Mercer," Desmond replied, his voice calm, measured, and resonating with the quiet authority that now utterly dominated the lobby. "The delay was regrettable, but perhaps necessary. I had an impromptu, rather illuminating orientation to your bank's customer service protocol down here." He paused, looking down at the stack of bills he held. "I wanted to ensure my funds for the Code Future initiative were secured before our meeting. As you can see, that took a bit more effort than anticipated." Mercer's expression hardened from horror to controlled rage. He understood instantly. The man kneeling on his floor, collecting his own cash, was not just any client. He was Desmond Pierce, the key investor and founder of the tech holding company that Crestview Trust was desperately trying to court for a massive, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar joint venture. The bank's future growth was tied directly to the goodwill of the man Brittany Lowell had just treated like a common criminal and humiliated like a child. The silence hung heavy and humiliating over Brittany. She could feel the stares of her colleagues, the venomous realization of her catastrophic mistake sinking into her bones. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She had been the judge, the punisher, and now she was the fool. The tables had not just turned, they had been smashed. Mercer did not waste another second on the situation. He knew this level of offense required immediate, visible retribution. He turned his attention sharply to Brittany, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low growl that was nonetheless clearly heard throughout the quiet banking hall. "Brittany Lowell," Mercer announced, his words slow and precise, ensuring every employee in earshot understood the consequence of her actions. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties at Crestview Trust Bank. Your employment is terminated for gross unprofessionalism and a spectacular lack of judgment. Do not touch your terminal. Security will escort you off the premises, and you will receive a full review of this incident from HR." He didn't yell. He merely pronounced a sentence, clean and final. Brittany's composure finally shattered. A quiet, desperate whimper escaped her lips. She stared at Mercer, then at Desmond, the full weight of her career being vaporized by a single, casual sweep of her elbow. She tried to plead, to apologize, but the words were trapped in her throat. Desmond Pierce, having achieved the ultimate vindication, finally stood completely straight. He smoothed the final bill into his stack, looked past the trembling Brittany, and toward Mercer, ready to move on. His purpose was complete. The money was secured, and the lesson was delivered. Franklin Mercer stood rigid, his hand still extended to Desmond, his face a complex mixture of apology and simmering fury. He had already delivered the firing, clean and swift, but he knew that words alone wouldn't undo the gross indignity Desmond Pierce had just suffered on his property. "Mr. Pierce, I cannot apologize enough for this," Mercer stated, withdrawing his hand and turning to address the entire bank lobby, his voice regaining its true volume, loud and firm. Crestview Trust Bank has zero tolerance for disrespect, unprofessionalism, or any form of discrimination. Zero. Brittany Lowell's conduct is inexcusable. Security will manage her departure. He then looked directly at the stunned supervisor, Mark. "Mark, you will immediately ensure all surveillance footage from this area is secured and delivered to the executive office. I will personally review this incident to ensure that any broader policy violations and potential legal liabilities stemming from this discrimination are handled with the utmost severity." The employees who had been watching the spectacle now collectively stared at the floor, suddenly desperate to distance themselves from Brittany's actions. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by the chilling silence of witnessing an instant, high-stakes career implosion. Brittany, still frozen behind the counter, looked like a statue carved from ash, her career dissolving around her like cheap paper. Desmond, holding the firmly stacked $75,000, finally spoke, his focus still entirely on Brittany. He took a slow, deliberate step towards the counter, his eyes locking onto hers. His face was calm, but his voice was weighty, resonating with a final, undisputed authority that dwarfed the CEO's power. "Brittany," Desmond began, his tone almost conversational, yet utterly devastating. "I came here today for $75,000. That money is for children who need laptops and internet access, not judgment. I can replace that cash in a second." He lifted the stack slightly. He leaned in, making his final statement a personal, inescapable indictment. "The only thing that fell to the floor here, Brittany, was your respect." He paused, letting the truth sink into her wide, panicked eyes. "And that will cost you far more than $75,000. The statement hung in the air, a brutal distillation of the entire encounter. Brittany finally found her voice, a choked, desperate, "Please, Mr. Mercer, I." But the CEO raised a dismissive hand, cutting her off. Desmond turned away from the counter, dismissing Brittany and her shattered career with the simple act of turning his back. He moved toward Mercer, placing the collected cash securely into the inner pocket of his hoodie. "Franklin, I appreciate the prompt response," Desmond said, his composure flawless. "Now, shall we proceed with that strategic discussion? I've wasted enough time on basic banking transactions today." Mercer nodded, relief warring with professional distress. "Absolutely, Desmond. Right this way. My deepest apologies again." He gestured toward the private executive elevators. As Desmond Pierce, the self-made tech titan in a simple gray hoodie, walked side by side with the CEO toward the polished brass doors, leaving the turmoil behind, a few employees in the queue began to murmur. They realized, too late, that they had just cheered for the humiliation of a man who could likely buy their entire branch. The elevator doors silently slid shut, whisking the two executives upward toward the highest floors and the future of Crestview Trust Bank. Down below, Brittany Lowell stood alone, trembling uncontrollably, utterly shamed, watching her former colleagues nervously avoid her gaze while the security team approached. The marble floor that had served as the stage for her moment of cheap power was now the place where her professional life had ended, reduced to a devastating, unrecoverable loss. The lesson was etched onto the silence of the lobby. Never mistake quiet dignity for weakness, and always remember the true, immeasurable cost of respect. And that's the end of the story of Desmond Pierce and the cost of respect. What Brittany thought was her moment of power became the instant of her downfall. Desmond proved that true wealth isn't just in your bank account, but in the dignity you choose to carry, even when kneeling on a marble floor. The world turns, and those who look down on others often find themselves the ones looking up. If this story of sweet, instant karma and corporate justice resonated with you, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have said to Brittany? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next thrilling story of reversals of fortune. Respect is always more expensive than cash.